Okay, so you've seen the headlines, right? Inflation is cooling. But then you go to the grocery store or the gas station, and your wallet is telling a completely different story. So what gives? Why does everything still feel so incredibly expensive? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break it all down and solve that puzzle. Yeah, this is really the heart of the matter, isn't it? The news is all about inflation slowing down, but that doesn't really match up with what you're seeing every day. The grocery bill, the price at the pump, your utility costs, it all just feels high. And let me tell you, you are not imagining things. So let's get into exactly what's happening here. All right, so here's the big disconnect. The headline says the inflation rate is, let's say, 2.7%. On paper, that sounds okay, right? Manageable. But your reality is that your bills are still way, way higher than they were just a couple of years ago. So how can both of these things be true at the same time? To figure this out, we're going to use a really simple analogy. So to really make sense of all this, let's just forget about all the confusing economic jargon for a minute. Instead, I want you to think about it like we're all on a road trip. Just imagine the whole economy is one big car, and it's driving down this long highway. We're all in it together, right? And this journey, well, that's just our economic life over time. Pretty simple so far. Now let's add a couple of key details to this picture. Okay, first up, inflation. In our road trip analogy, inflation is simply the car's speed, not the price of gas, not the car itself, just the speed on the speedometer. It's all about how fast things are changing. So a high inflation rate, that means the car is just flying down the highway, pedal to the metal. A low inflation rate means we're cruising at a much slower, steadier pace. And here is the absolute key to the whole thing. The prices you pay for everything, that's the distance the car has already traveled. Think of it like the total mileage on the odometer. Every single mile you drive adds to that total, and you can't just reset it back to zero. And that right there, that's the whole point. When the news says inflation is cooling, it doesn't mean the car slammed on the brakes or, threw it into reverse. It absolutely does not mean prices are going down. All it means is that the driver took their foot off the accelerator. You're still moving forward, you're still adding miles to the trip, you're just not doing it as fast as you were before. Okay, so let's take our road trip analogy and use it to look at the two ideas that really explain everything. The big difference between the inflation rate and the price level. First, let's talk about the rate. Like we said, this is just the car's speed. Economists measure this as a percentage, and it basically tells us how fast prices are changing over a certain amount of time, usually a year. So when you see that headline number, say 2.7%, that's the speed of our economic car for the past year. But the real question is, what does that speed actually mean for the distance we've traveled? And this is so important to get. An inflation rate of 2.7% is still a positive number. That means prices are still going up. The car is still moving forward, still adding to the total distance. It's just not screaming down the highway at 100 miles an hour anymore. For prices to actually come down, you would need something called deflation, a negative inflation rate. And in our analogy, that's like putting the car in reverse, which, as you can imagine, is pretty rare. Just think about the journey we've all been on recently. For a couple of years, it felt like our car was going, 80 miles an hour? We covered a ton of distance really fast. And that's when prices just shot through the roof. Now, today, maybe we've slowed down to a more comfortable 30 miles an hour. And that feels a lot better, right? The ride is smoother. But all that distance we covered back when we were flying at 80, you don't get to erase that. The total mileage, that overall price level, is the grand total of the entire trip. That's exactly why things feel so high, because they are high, reflecting all that past speed. Okay, so that explains the big picture, why prices aren't actually falling. But there's another piece to this puzzle. Why does that 2.7% number feel so, wrong when you look at your own budget? Well, that's because we need to talk about your personal inflation rate. You see, that official number you hear about comes from something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI for short. To get this number, the government basically creates a giant imaginary shopping cart, a market basket, and fills it with all sorts of things, from groceries and cars to rent and haircuts. Then they track how the total price of that basket changes over time to come up with one single number that's supposed to represent the average person's experience. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Nobody is perfectly average. That CPI number is a huge mashup of thousands of different price changes. Some things get more expensive, some actually get cheaper. What you personally experience depends entirely on what you actually spend your money on. So that national average can totally hide the real pain you might be feeling in the areas that matter most to you. Let's look at an example. So the overall average might be 2.7%, and maybe food is pretty close to that at 2.6%. But then you look at energy, and wow, it's up 4.2%. So if a big slice of your budget goes towards gassing up your car and paying your electric bill, your personal inflation rate is already way higher than what you're hearing on the news. And it gets even more interesting when we dig a little deeper. That big food category, that's just another average made up of hundreds of different grocery items. Your real experience at the checkout counter is all about what's in your specific shopping cart. For example, let's say your family loves steak or burgers. Well, you've definitely been feeling the squeeze. The price of beef and veal could be up something staggering, like 15.8% in a year. That is almost 6 times the overall inflation rate we were talking about. No wonder it hurts. Or how about just keeping the lights on? Your electricity bill might have jumped by 6.9%. That's an expense you can't really cut back on, and it's climbing more than twice as fast as the average. These are the numbers that really hit you where you live. But just to show you how it's all a big mix, let's look at something like dairy. The prices for milk and cheese might have actually gone down by, say, 1.6%. That decrease helps pull the average for all food down. So you see, if your shopping cart is full of cheese and milk but no beef, your grocery bill tells a totally different story. The CPI's job is to somehow average all of that out. So let's boil this all down. What's the main takeaway? Let's quickly go over what cooling inflation really means for your wallet. Okay, there are just 3 things you need to remember next time you see a headline about inflation. Number 1, cooling just means we're slowing down. Prices are still rising. Number 2, this is not prices falling. We are not going back to 2019 prices. And number 3, that one big number is just an average. Your personal inflation rate depends on what you buy, and it could be totally different. And it's really important for us to say this is all for educational purposes. We're definitely not giving out any financial advice. Our whole goal here is just to help you understand the language of economics a little better so you can make sense of the headlines and be a more informed consumer. So we'll leave you with a question to think about. Now that you really get the difference between the speed of inflation and the distance of prices, how does that change the way you see the news? Something to chew on. Thanks for watching.